Hello, John Varineau here with another edition of Varineau's Voice, and looking forward to the Reading Symphony's performance featuring Vaughan Williams' 5 variants of Dives and Lazarus, Tchaikovsky's Rococo variations, and the Oxford Symphony by Haydn. Ralph Vaughan Williams was once described as looking like a farmer on his way to judge the shorthorns at an agricultural fair. The Scottish music critic Cecil Gray gave an even more colorful description. He flounders about in the sea of his ideas like a vast and ungainly porpoise, with great puffing and blowing. Yet in the end, after tremendous efforts and an almost heroic tenacity, there emerges, dripping and exhausted from the struggle, a real and lovable personality, unassuming, modest, and almost apologetic. His father was a minister, and his mother was the great-granddaughter of the famous potter Josiah Wedgwood. His great-uncle was Charles Darwin. He attended Cambridge and the Royal College of Music, but developed slowly as a composer, publishing his first composition when he was 30. At about the same time, he discovered English folk music and traveled throughout the country collecting and transcribing folk songs, many of which found their way into his compositions. He also edited the English hymnal, one of the most influential hymnals of the 20th century, which contains some of his own hymns. He wrote articles for the Grove's Dictionary of Music and Musicians and traveled to France to study with Maurice Ravel. In 1909, he conducted the premiere of his Fantasia on a theme of Thomas Tallis, and a year later, when he was 38, the premiere of his first symphony. By the end of his life, Vaughan Williams had written 9 symphonies, 5 operas, several concertos, and numerous works for chamber ensembles, choruses, and bands, and was known as the grand old man of English music. Throughout his life, Vaughan Williams was a devotee of English folk song and felt that it should inform the work of English composers. Have we not all about us forms of musical expression which we can purify and raise to the level of great art, he asked? For instance, the lilt of a chorus at a music hall joining in a popular song, the children dancing to a barrel organ, the rousing fervor of a Salvation Army hymn, the cries of the street peddlers, the factory girls singing their sentimental songs. Vaughan Williams first heard the English folk song Dives and Lazarus when he was a young man. He subsequently quoted it in the first movement of his folk song suite for military band, still a perennial favorite for American bands, and then used it in the English hymnal as the tune Kingsfold for the hymn I Heard the Voice of Jesus Say. Just as no folk song is sung the same way by various singers, the 5 variants of Dives and Lazarus present reminiscences of various versions in my own collection and those of others, rather than exact replicas. Vaughan Williams wrote his 5 variants on commission from the British Council for the 1939 World's Fair in New York City, and it was played at his funeral at Westminster Abbey. In the words of his biographer, Michael Kennedy, it was as if Vaughan Williams himself had spoken. The tune which he had loved all his life, which came from the soil of England, ageless and anonymous, was the perfect device to create a mood of remembrance. Haydn worked for nearly 30 years for the famed Esterházy family, the richest in all Hungary. Its head, Prince Nicholas, was an ardent music fan and an amateur musician himself. He built a spectacular summer home, Esterházy, which rivaled Versailles in Schönbrunn in its grandeur. Music was continually present at Esterházy, and it was Haydn's job to provide it. Haydn's contract with the prince detailed his responsibilities. He will be bound to compose such music as His Serene Highness shall command, and not let such compositions be communicated to any other party, much less be copied, but they shall remain for his use only and his rightful ownership, and he shall not, without knowledge and permission, compose for any other person. Initially, the artistic atmosphere was exhilarating. Where I should like to live and die, Haydn said. However, toward the end of his tenure at Esterházy, Haydn began to chafe at the relative isolation of the place. I am forced to remain here. It really is sad always to be a slave. He wrote literally thousands of works for Prince Esterházy. How is it that the prince never got bored with Haydn's style and hired someone else? Haydn explained the trick to his biographer. The prince was satisfied with all my works. I received applause. As head of the orchestra, I was able to experiment, to observe what made a strong impression and what weakened this. In other words, to correct, supplement, cut, take risks. I was cut off from the world. No one could cause me to doubt myself and torment me, and so I had to be original. In spite of his isolation in the country, Haydn's reputation spread throughout Europe. A new contract with this prince allowed him to write for others. Thus, in 1785, Haydn received a sumptuous commission from Paris for 6 symphonies. Their success brought a commission for 5 more, of which the one in G major, number 92, is the last. When Nicholas died in 1790, his son, Anton, dismissed the court orchestra but kept Haydn on, without any obligations of any kind. This allowed Haydn to travel to London for an extended stay. The Symphony number 92 is called the Oxford Symphony because it was one of 3 symphonies that Haydn presented at Oxford University when he was awarded an honorary doctorate. This symphony follows the typical plan that Haydn settled on for most of his later symphonies. The first movement begins slowly and tenderly, and then dissolves into a cheery and brilliant fast tempo. The second movement has a gentle lyrical theme that is interrupted by more stern and a serious one. The minuetto is more robust than genteel. The charm of its trio is the misplaced accents in the triple meter. The final movement is typical flash and dash, but filled with Haydnesque wit and charm. Tchaikovsky is the gold standard for audiences who love lush, romantic orchestral music. In particular, his concertos and last 3 symphonies, the 4th, 5th, and 6th, occupy the top positions of the romantic orchestral repertoire. This is highly emotional music with tremendous contrasts in dynamics and mood. Of all the late 19th century composers, Tchaikovsky had a knack for writing beautiful and eloquent melodies that would instantly connect with the listener. However, Tchaikovsky, who musically wore his heart on his sleeve, had a deep respect, if not reverence, for the music of the 18th century. The music composed by such greats as Haydn and Mozart is more restrained and succinct than any romantic composition. It has a clarity of form and simple elegance that is rarely found in the music of the 19th century. It is this sort of music that Tchaikovsky was trying to emulate with his variations on a Rococo theme. Tchaikovsky, the romantic, was dressing up as a classical composer. Tchaikovsky wrote this set of variations for the principal cellist of the Imperial Russian Music Society, Wilhelm Karl Friedrich Fitzenhagen. He asked Fitzenhagen to go through the music and make suggestions. Tchaikovsky got way more than he had asked for. What audiences hear today in this composition is considerably different from what Tchaikovsky had originally intended. Much of the actual cello writing is Fitzenhagen's. He reordered the variations as well, even deleting one of them. However, when Tchaikovsky's publisher gave him the opportunity to restore the piece to its original form, he declined. Incredibly, with all of the reams of academic work on Tchaikovsky's music done in the last century, there are still no published orchestra parts to the original version. The variations themselves are easy to listen to and understand. After a brief introduction, the cello plays a simple little melody. That theme is probably original to Tchaikovsky. His attempt at writing with the simple elegance of the Rococo. Rococo really refers to paintings from the time of Mozart and Haydn. They're decorative works, frequently of country scenes. 7 variations follow the theme, each exploiting the cello and challenging the cellist. Although easy to listen to, these variations are tremendously difficult to perform. A wolf in sheep's clothing.